Our guest today is Dr. Rainer Zitelmann. He returns today. Rainer Zitelmann holds doctorates in history and sociology. He is a very prolific author. His latest books are New Space Capitalism and 2075, which we interviewed him earlier for those books if you'd like to see that interview. However, today we will talk about another important work, his book, Hitler's National Socialism. I'm going to show you a copy right here. Hitler's National Socialism by Rainer Zitelmann. Dr. Rainer Zitelmann, welcome back to the Bruce Collins Show.
Thank you. Pleasure for me to be back again.
Now, Rainer, the book we want to tackle today, again, is Hitler's National Socialism. For those of you watching on the YouTube, I'm showing a picture of the cover right there. You can get this at Amazon or wherever other fine books are sold. Can you remind our listeners, though, before we get into that, of your new books, New Space Capitalism and 2075, with a brief summary?
Yes. New Space Capitalism, this is first about the history of spaceflight to explain how it came to the shift from government-led spaceflight to private spaceflight. Today, or let's talk about last year, we had 324 rocket launches worldwide, and 165 out of them were SpaceX. So today, space capitalism is reality, but the book is also about the future. How can we earn money in the future? For example, with space tourism, asteroid mining, and I have a focus on property rights and real estate. And this is a special thing on the book that I'm of the opinion it will be very important to have property rights on celestial bodies, what we don't have today, because according to the Outer Space Treaty, it's prohibited for countries to claim ownership over celestial bodies or land on celestial bodies. But I think it should be allowed for private companies, and I think it will happen in a similar way as it happened when you conquered in America the West with settlers and squatters. So this is the topic of this book. And the other book that you mentioned, 2075, When Beauty Became a Crime, this is a novel, an anti-egalitarian novel. The story goes like this. It's in 2075, and the story plays in Boston and in New York, so in the United States. And there is an egalitarian extreme movement. They start, as always, in the universities, and they claim that beauty is unjust. They say there are privileged women who look too beautiful, and we have to do something against it because they have undeserved privileges. They can get maybe rich husband easier. They have, so what they say, better opportunities in their job. And so it's against equality. And so in the end, they gain influence in one of the two parties. In 2075, we have two parties in the United States, the Rule of Law Party and the Justice Party. And inside the Justice Party, they become very influential. And when the Justice Party comes to power, they start with concrete measures. First, every beautiful woman or every woman between age 15 and 40 has to make a scan one time a year, and then with AI, they calculate the percentage they apply to the beauty ideal. And if they are if they fell in this category privileged beauty, what means more than 95% adaptation to the beauty ideal, then they have to pay higher taxes. There are quotas at university. But then this movement becomes more and more radical, more and more extreme, as it happens often with radical movements. And then there's a law that every girl with 15 years that is too beautiful has to make a plastic surgery to make her face more average. And then there's a movement that goes against them, freedom movement with a very beautiful student, a young student, and a libertarian journalist, and they go against it. And then it's this fight between this egalitarian dictatorship. It turns more and more into a dictatorship, and this freedom fighters. So who said freedom before equality. So you see, and this is also a little bit link to the topic we want to talk today, because all of my life as an historian, I studied extreme totalitarian movements. I started with the topic we were talking today, Hitler's National Socialism, and later I studied communist movements and communist countries. And so this book, 2075, it's not pure science fiction, but I tried to make it very realistic so that you can assume these are things that could really happen, because in a different way they already happened in history.
Okay, so your latest books are New Space Capitalism and 2075, both great books. I highly recommend them. And Dr. Rainer Zitelmann writes some great, well-founded books. This is the book that we're going to talk about today, Hitler's National Socialism, again by Rainer Zitelmann. Now, Rainer, your book is not a biography of Hitler. It seems to be a study of his objectives and worldview. Why was it important for you to record this aspect of Hitler?
Yes, first of all, it was my first doctoral dissertation. You know, I have two PhDs, one in history, one in sociology, and this is a long time ago, but it's still now it becomes more and more influential in the last years. It has been translated and published in Spain and in Poland and in Russia and in the Czech Republic, and now in the next few months we will have an edition in Italy. So it took a while, to be honest. So that's because it's a new approach. And yes, why? So there are hundreds, and not hundreds. That's wrong. 10,000s of books about National Socialism, fascism, World War II. And I think even about Hitler, only Hitler biographies, there are some hundreds. And I think I read all of them. And so for a doctoral dissertation, you have to have something new. You can't only repeat what others wrote also. And what I did, this was the first thing. I collected all speeches, all essays, and I analyzed his two books. Hitler wrote two books. One book, a lot of people know it, Mein Kampf, but there's also a second book that was never published, and and especially all his speeches. You know, he had hundreds, thousands of speeches, and this was, I think, 90% of what I had to do, to go in the archives and to get all these transcripts from all his speeches. And then I had thousands and thousands of pages to analyze. And what I did, I want to find out, how did he think? What was, especially in two areas, in the economy, his thoughts about the economy, and social policy. So because there were already research and some books about his goals in foreign policy, or his goals in war, or his with his goals with his racist policy, with killing the Jews, and all this stuff. There was a lot of stuff, but people were not so much interested in what he thought about the economy and social politics. And I thought that this is very important for one reason, because when he came to power, when he had his biggest success in the elections, this was from 1930 to 1933. At this time, he spoke not so much about this Jewish topic and anti-Semitism, not because he changed his mind, no time, but because he saw that he could reach out only for a minority in Germany, as he did in the beginning of his career. This was in 1919. There, his speeches was a lot about the Jews and how dangerous they are. But you can't win millions and millions of people with these things. But this was a time, you remember, of the of crisis where 6 million people were without jobs in Germany, and this was also in the United States. Remember this, the economic crisis starting with the stock
Depression.
market
Right.
crash in 1929. And
Mhm.
so this was a very hard time. And what made him attractive, this is what I saw, was not his goals like he had this goal to, how he called it, to conquer new living space in the East, like in the Soviet Union, in Russia. So, but this was not what made his speeches attractive, and also not his radical ideas about uh, his uh, against Jewish people. But
Mhm.
what was more important was what he promised about social politics, what he wanted to do for workers, for example, to give them better opportunities to rise up. And this made it very attractive. And a lot of people thought that he had no real, ideas or worldview or theory like Hitlerism. They thought it was only like shouting very, very crazy. But this is not true. If you analyze all these things, he had a system, a worldview that was consistent in itself. Of course, it was without any moral, and of course, in the end, it led to all these crimes like killing Jewish people and starting the war. But a lot of people think criminals have to be stupid and crazy, and sometimes they are, but these are not the real dangerous criminals who are stupid and crazy, but the real dangerous are the intelligent ones, and Hitler was absolutely one of them. He was very well read. He didn't study, but he read thousands of books all night about history, about politics, about military things, about religion, about a lot of things, and and he had a system how he thought, how we call it a worldview, or in German, it's the word is Weltanschauung. It means how you see the world, and it was very consistent in itself. And I tried in my book to reconstruct it, so the reader will not know how I think about Hitler, because I think this is not so interesting in my view, but he will learn how Hitler thought. And for some people, it was a little bit of provocation, because I had not all this, writing on every page how bad he was and how cruel and this, because I think everyone knows this. And people, I think people who bought the book or read the book, they want to better understand how could this be so attractive for millions of people in Germany, also very smart people, intelligent people. How did it come? What was his ideas?
Mhm. One of the central arguments in your book, again, the book is Hitler's National Socialism by Rainer Zitelmann. One of the central arguments is that Hitler's economic views have often been misunderstood. What is the single biggest misconception historians and the public have about Hitler's relationship to capitalism?
Yes, it's totally wrong what people think. They think he was pro-capitalism, and they think that big business supported him to come to power. These are all these Marxist legends that are not true. No, he was against capitalism. He was an anti-capitalist, and he criticized very often not only in his speeches, but I have to add this. We have recordings from what he said in his inner circle. That's called the monologues in the Führer headquarters, because always late at night he spoke sometimes hours and hours about almost everything. And fortunately, there was someone taking notes. And so we know. And it is important because you have always to see what was only maybe propaganda and what was his real opinion. And of course, there's a difference between both. I give you one example. Of course, in his propaganda, he was against Stalin, against the Bolshevists, and so on in his propaganda, because he was in war with them starting 1948. But in his inner circle, he admired Stalin, and he even praised him for having a system, a planned economy that is much better and more efficient as it is the capitalist system. And yes, you find a lot of really surprising quotes in my books, in my book, how he admired Stalin more and more. Beginning at he saw him even as a role model, and he wanted to change the German economy when he won the war more and more in this direction. And he even started in the middle of the 60s. But now you have to understand one thing. Some people ask me, was Hitler a socialist, when I say that he was against capitalism? And there you have to distinguish. He was not a socialist in this traditional way as the communists were, because he didn't want to nationalize all means of production. Now, this is the classic Marxist approach to nationalize all means of production, that the state should own everything. But Hitler was skeptic in this way, because he was a socio-Darwinist, and he believed in the survival of the fittest and all these things. And so he thought, if he nationalized everything and there's no more competition, then the system will be not so efficient, because what he believed in nature, there's always the law of survival of the fittest. And if you abolish this, then you will be not efficient. But this doesn't mean that he was for a free market economy. On the contrary, what he wanted was, he said it very, very precise in one speech. He said, I will tell the entrepreneurs, you have to do this and that and that. This is what I will tell them. He called it the primacy of politics. And if they do it, I'm fine, because then I don't have to do it. But if they don't do it, then the government will do it, or even will nationalize it. So this was more his approach. So in a legal way, private property remained in Germany. It was not as it was in the Soviet Union, that everything was nationalized, but it was only in a formal legal way. It was more like an empty shell, because private property means that you as an entrepreneur can decide what to invest, when to invest, what to do. But this was not Hitler's idea. Hitler's idea was that he and that the government had to decide. And so it was even similar in politics. There was a constitution in Germany from the Weimar Republic, and this constitution was never abolished officially. There was no new constitution. But in the end, it was only an empty shell, because this was more his strategy to keep it formal as it was, but in the end, to turn it in completely the opposite. And this was the way. So you have to distinguish between the old way, how communists did it, like in the Bolshevist revolution, to kill the old elites, to expropriate the capitalist, and then at the new way, how Hitler did it. He tried in 1923 to come to power with force. But he was not successful. And then he was in prison for a time, and then he wrote his book, Mein Kampf, and then he thought about it, how can I do it in a different way? And his strategy was, no, it's better to do it with elections, not with force, but to do it with elections. And in the end, he was elected. Of course, he had not the majority, but he was much stronger than all other parties. And then with a coalition with another party in 1933, he came to power. And then his revolution started. And I call it a revolution, but not this old type of revolution with guns and killing people like the French Revolution or the communist revolution. No, a new kind of revolution starting with elections in a legal way, and then step by step over the month to get all the power. He started to forbid all the other parties step by step, and in the end there was only one single party left, this party that was called the National Socialist Workers' Party. By the way, I don't use the word Nazi. I know in America you use Nazi. I don't use it because this was more a word coined by their enemies, because the socialists, they didn't like the word National Socialist, because what they love, their holy socialism, is in this word. And so they didn't like they never used this word National Socialism because of this. It was their own ideology, socialism. And so they called them Nazi or fascist. But I call them like they called themselves. And this is, also the title of my book, Hitler's National Socialism. So you have to understand that it is a kind of socialism, but it's not the same as the communist approach. But this is also very important. He admired not only Stalin, he admired the communists about the so-called bourgeoisie. He thought they are entrepreneurs. He thought these are weak people, coward people. He thought, forget them. They are very weak because, they are tolerant, and tolerance. To be tolerant means for him being very, very weak. And if he wanted to praise one, for example, Bruce, if he wanted to praise you, he would say, Bruce, he's a real fanatic. Fanatic for us means something negative, but for him, it was the highest way how to praise someone. He said, oh, he was a real fanatic. And what he said, he want to win the ex-former communists and from the workers, because he thought they are strong, they are powerful, they are fanatics, they are true believers, they believe in an ideology. But about the bourgeoisie, he thought, no, they don't believe in anything, they only look for money, they are materialistic, and forget them. Of course, in a way, it was a wrong perception, but you have to understand, when you want to understand him, it's important. I mentioned this social Darwinist approach. For him, everything was a fight between the strong ones and the weak ones. This was it all about. And the weak one was the bourgeoisie. They were a coward, and so and he laughed at them about their tolerance for others. But the communists, no, he took them serious because, they are strong, they are fanatics, they are real fighters, they are true believers. And so he thought, and so he tried to copy them in a lot of ways. For example, the 1st of May was always the day for the workers' movement, for the socialists, the first of May, and he made it first time in Germany to a holiday, 1st of May, and also had this red flag like the communists, but of course not with a hammer and circle, but with a swastika, and he learned. Especially, he admired, he even wrote it in Mein Kampf, he admired the communists because he thought they know everything about propaganda, and he tried to copy their propaganda. And he also admired the Catholic Church because they are this 2,000 years and they are also true believers and with a clear hierarchy. And if you analyze his propaganda, he copied almost everything from either from communists or from the Catholic Church. So he took it. This was like his genius. He was a genius in propaganda. But if you see his speeches, some people get wrong because when you see some of his speeches, you see mostly only a few seconds or half minutes when he's like shouting very extreme. Ich werde das deutsche Volk! Like this way. Yes, you see this. But I say 95% of the speech was not this way. It was calm. It was like with arguments. And he even spoke about economies and these things, and even sometimes with a soft, calm voice. Then only it was like, it became more, I can compare it with, sexual intercourse. Yes, it's not only orgasm all this time. This is only the very end. That before it's more not so. Yes, and it becomes more and more and more. And this was I think it's a good comparison because his speeches were a little bit like this. And if you see only, if you would see a video about sexual intercourse, only the end or orgasm, you wouldn't get a real impression what it is about. And that's the same as with the speeches. If you see only this last thing when he really was in this extreme like ecstasis, this was not, he had a lot of arguments.
Let me ask you, you mentioned he was anti-Marxist and also anti-traditional capitalism. So how did he envision an economic system? Because as you said, some companies in Nazi Germany were capitalist, I guess, and but yet he also kind of fostered a resentment against wealthy and elites. So how do you explain his economic system, and would it have survived long term?
It was it was a mixed system, and in this way very modern, and in this way, I will put another way. Look today, the economic system in China, for example. It's not as it was in Mao's time. It's not like everything is made by the government or plan. They have also entrepreneurs. But in the end, the party makes a lot of decisions. And in this way, he was modern. I call him a modern socialist in contrast to the traditional socialist, because it doesn't mean that he was for free markets. Absolutely not. He was absolutely against it. But he understood that if you do everything only by the government, that this will be not efficient. This has something to do, as I said, with his being a social Darwinist who believed in the survival of the fittest. And so it was a mixed economy, and like these systems, sometimes they can be successful for a time, but I don't think in the long run. But he had the idea, and this is also very important to understand, he believed in a kind of autarky. How do you pronounce it in English? Autarky? Do you know what it means? Like a closed, without exports, a country.
I'm not sure what the word is.
It's sorry. I don't know how to pronounce in German. It's autarky. It's if you have a economic system self-sufficient without imports and export. It's okay. So I try to explain it in a different way. Um, he didn't believe in what Germany does today, and did it this time doing a lot of exports all over the world, because he had a theory. The theory was about shrinking markets. He believed that in the way when the the countries in Asia and everywhere in the world, when they develop more and more, that the markets will shrink, and that it's that there are less possibilities for export. Of course, this was wrong, as we saw after World War II, but this is what he believed. And so he believed that it was important, what he called, to conquer living space in the East. And this means in the Soviet Union. So he wanted to build a big empire similar to the United States in a way, because he thought that in the East, in the Soviet Union, you have so much resources. You know, you have not in no country in the world you have so much resources and commodities as in Russia or as in the Soviet Union. And he wanted to conquer. This was his big goal, to conquer the Soviet Union and then to build a big empire. And his idea was to have, later he was in war also with the UK, with Great Britain, but this was not his goal. It happened because he made this aggressive politics, and then when he attacked Poland, in this moment, France and Great Britain declared war against him. But this is what was not his plan. His plan was even to have like an agreement with Great Britain. So you can have India and all the rest of the world. I don't care about it. But leave us in Europe, especially in the East, to go there. But of course, Churchill, didn't agree with this kind of deal. And as when I talk about deal, maybe I should say something, because today there are a lot of people who compare Donald Trump with Hitler. I
Or
think
fascism.
and fascism, and I don't think so. To be honest, I'm not a Trump fan. I don't like him so much, but he's a totally different person to Adolf Hitler, because start with one thing. Hitler had a consistent ideology all of his life. As a result from reading hundreds and hundreds of books, I don't think that Trump reads any books, maybe even not his own books. And and Hitler wrote his book by himself. I don't think that Trump wrote any book by himself.
Right.
And he had a theory that was consistent. Trump changed very often his opinion about. There are only very few things that kept always the same in Trump. So, like that he is against that he thinks that tariffs are a great thing, because he thinks that the United States are exploited by. It was Japan, later Germany or China, and so on. So we should have high tariffs against it. So this is very few things. I think the most important thing is that he thinks that he should be number one and that he's the greatest. But the difference with Hitler was someone who believed in this theory, in this theory. So I think this is one thing where you absolutely can't compare both of them.
Mhm. Now, your book challenges interpretations that have become deeply embedded in both academic and popular culture. What has been the strongest criticism of your work, And again, the book we're talking about is Hitler's National Socialism, Rainer Zitelmann. Great book. What has been the strongest criticism of your work and how do you respond to it?
So in the beginning, I was surprised that if you look the reviews in the most important scientific journals, historian journals, like in Germany, we have Historische Zeitschrift, it's the most prestigious, but also in the United States, the most prestigious historical journals. It was a very positive reaction. I was surprised about it, but you have it also some quotes there from even one very famous historian. He lived in the United States, Clemens von Klemperer. He was from a Jewish family and he fled from Austria to the United States, and he was the best expert for German resistance against Adolf Hitler. And he praised the book. You have his quote on the book. Of course, there were people from the left, and there are people on the far left who don't like this book because they think that Hitler was pro-capitalism, and of course, they don't like if I compare his socialist ideas with their socialism. But this is more like their idolatry, because I have to add something maybe. Today, I'm a classic liberal, or maybe you would, in Germany, you call it liberal. In the United States, you would call it maybe like libertarian or free market, but not when I wrote this book. Not when I wrote my first doctoral dissertation. I was more left-leaning when I wrote the book. So when people criticized me, and they know that today I'm like center right, but they didn't understand that I had a total different view when I wrote this doctoral dissertation. When I was a teenager, I was even hardcore communist. I was a Maoist, but with a teenager, I founded a Maoist group at my school. I edited a newspaper, a far extreme left newspaper. And I was very young, like 13, 14 years old, member of, then later of a youth organization of a communist party. When I wrote this doctoral dissertation, and worked about Hitler, I was older. I was not this hardcore Marxist, but I was more left-leaning than I'm today, of course. So, but this made it possible for me to understand what made Adolf Hitler so attractive. It was his social goals. It was he spoke a lot about workers, how to give workers better opportunities. So this was the main topic, that workers should have better opportunities to rise up. And he criticized that in this old capitalist system, workers had not equal opportunities, and they want to change. And these promises were very important and made it very attractive. And so this made it easier for me, as someone who was more left-leaning, to understand. But I think they hate him because he is similar in a way to them. Of course, not in everything, but in a lot of things. And even sometimes people said, yes, but the difference is his anti-Semitism and this against Jewish people. But if you look on the left today at the universities in Germany or also in the United States, there you have a lot of people who don't call themselves anti-Semites. They speak about Zionism instead, and criticize Israel. But in fact, it's similar, and they hate the Jewish people on the same reason why they hate capitalists. It's envy, because they are envious. They think that Jewish people are superior, and so they hate them. And you have a lot of similarities. A lot of people even don't know. Even Karl Marx, he was a Jew, but he was also anti-Semite. There are a lot of quotes from Karl Marx, really with hate against the Jews. And so I think this is not the biggest difference. Of course, there are differences. For me, it's not the same. It's not. National Socialism and communism is not the same, but they are like twin brothers in a way. And because they are so similar in a lot of ways, this is the reason why they fight. Sometimes it's in life you have more fight with people who are close to you, but some, like between, for example, inside the Christian religion, between Protestant and Catholics, for some 100 years ago, there were more fights as between, for example, Buddhists and Buddhism and Christianity, because they don't have so much in common. It's a totally different world. But so they are twin brothers, and sometimes people ask me, or when they criticize, you ask what they criticize. They said, "Oh, you say he admired the communists and the Marxists, and he hated the bourgeoisie. But why was it that these Marxists and communists had to go to the concentration camps or in prison or were killed? Why is that? Yes, because it was the same that he admired them, and he had fear, because he thought they are strong, they are dangerous, they are a big danger, because they are the fanatics, they are the true believers. And he said, forget about this weak bourgeois people. I can use them. Maybe it was his idea. I can use them because they are weak. They are coward. But in the end, he was in a lot of things wrong, because the dangerous resistance against Hitler in the Third Reich came not from the left. It came from the far right. If you look at this people, maybe from this assassination attempt on July 1944, these people like Graf von Stauffenberg and so, they were traditional monarchist and far right-wing people. They were not leftist, and the resistance that was really dangerous for him was in his military, in the army. There were, I think, dozens of plans, and even sometimes they tried to kill him with explosions, with bombs. Of course, unfortunately, they failed, as we know, without any exception. We have this movie with a famous American actor. I forgot. Was it with Brad Pitt, or I don't know, about this assassination attempt? There were a lot of.
So, yeah.
There were a lot of how they tried to kill him, but these were mostly people from the army. And after this assassination attempt, it was in July 20, 1944, then he said, my big mistake was that I haven't done it like Stalin, because he said Stalin killed all these old generals and officers. He killed 10,000 of them, and it might. And this was my mistake. I should have done it like him. He was right, I was wrong. He killed them, and he tried to use them. But so there were a lot of things that he regretted in the end of his life. He said, we fight only hard against the left, but we forget to fight in the same way against the right. And this was our big mistake, what he said at the end of his life.
I have a picture of Trump, but I don't agree with everything he says. I also have a picture of Ron Paul, who is someone that I supported when he ran for president twice. So, and I also kind of follow Austrian economics, and I'm an admirer of von Mises and many others.
True. Yes.
Yeah. Now, Rainer,
sorry if I interrupt you. By the way,
no.
if you admire Mises, he was one of the first who really understood National Socialism. There was a letter unfortunately, I didn't know it when I wrote my book, but there's a letter he wrote to the New York Times, and he said the same as I said in my book. I only learned it 30 years later after I wrote my book, that there was this letter, and he said the same thing, that they called it only like capitalism, but that in reality it was by no way capitalism. And Hayek, Friedrich August von Hayek,
Hmm.
he said the same in his great book, The Road to Serfdom, what he wrote after the Second World War in the 40s. But at this time, when I wrote my book, I didn't know. They analyzed it in a similar way, of course, not deep as I did it. It was only they were, witness. They saw how it worked, but they had the point. They understood it, and only, of course, they don't have all the sources, and they're not historians. They are economists. But so they have had the best interpretation of National Socialism. This Austrian school people.
Hmm. Now, you've written a lot extensively about capitalism, entrepreneurship, and wealth creation. Did researching Hitler's economic ideas change or deepen your own views about the importance of economic freedom?
Yes, this was the beginning. This was my first book, my doctoral dissertation. When I wrote it first, it was in 1984, 1985, so a long time ago. And it changed something in me because, as I mentioned, when I started to write it, I believed in Marxism. And according to Marxist theory, Hitler was a lackey or was a puppet of capitalists. They said in reality, this was a financial capital, and Hitler was their best fighter. And I saw when I wrote my book that this is totally nonsense. That exactly the opposite is true, and this changed a lot. Maybe this was not the only, but the major contribution why I changed my own political attitude, because I saw when I analyzed it that this Marxist theory about fascism, so-called fascism, is totally nonsense. This was an important thing for me. And it is also not true. It's I have it in another book. I have one book I can really recommend. It's called In Defense of Capitalism. It's published in 30 languages now. None of my books is published in so many languages as this In Defense of Capitalism. It's also published in the United States. And there I have a chapter about this Marxist theory that capitalism is responsible for fascism. And this is like the legend that they supported Hitler, that they gave him the money, and this was the reason why he could rise. This is nonsense. There were some capitalists who supported him. This is true. But the majority, they didn't like him. They didn't like him because they saw the socialist rhetoric, and they had even fear. So the majority of big business in the Weimar Republic, they were not pro-Hitler. Later, of course, after he gained power, they were, like most people, opportunists, and they tried to arrange, and a lot of them supported him. But this was only after he came to power. Like a lot of people always, like most people, like churches, like workers, also big business, but not before. This were exceptions. The people who supported Adolf Hitler, they preferred other parties in Germany, but then in the end, of course, some supported him because they thought that it's the only way to go against communism. Because what you have to know, and what a lot of people don't know, in the end of democracy, of the Weimar Republic in Germany, there were only two very strong parties. This was Hitler's party and the Communist Party. The Communist Party was very, very strong. And they said they want to go to power, and then they want to make like a Bolshevist like the Soviet Union. They said open. When they had their protests in the street, they had posters with Stalin, and they admired Stalin, and they said it very open. We want a dictatorship of the proletariat, and we want to have communism in Germany. And they were very strong, and also the National Socialists, and they had fightings on the streets in the 30s with a lot of people killed and the more moderate bourgeois parties in the middle and social democrats, they became weaker and weaker and weaker because the situation was so bad. The economic crisis, that people looked for someone with extreme solutions. And this was either the communists or the National Socialists. And what a lot of people don't know, I can connect you with a colleague from Germany. He speaks maybe even better English than I do because he lived for a couple of years in the United States. And he wrote the standard book about who were Hitler's voters and the member of his parties. And he's the best expert in the world for this. And it's published now also in English language. And what he saw, that there were much more workers who supported Hitler than we thought previously. Researchers thought before that he was only supported by the middle class, but he was very strong with workers, and he was very weak, especially with Catholics. They didn't like him. He was very weak with Catholics. So if you like it, I can if you want to talk with him about it, because he did research 50 years about this topic. Now, all his life, he did research who were the members of the National Socialist Party, who were the voters of the National, and he does it with a lot of statistic and computers, and so and as I mentioned, his English is even better than my English, so I think it would be a pleasure for you to talk with him about these topics.
That sounds excellent. And also, maybe we can have you back in a month or so to talk about your book, In Defense of Capitalism. But right now, we've been talking with Rainer Zitelmann about his book, Hitler's National Socialism, again by Rainer Zitelmann. And before you go, because I know we're heading to the top of the hour real soon here, tell us where people can find your website.
Yes, they can find my website. It's my name, Zitelmann, ZITLMANN.com. And there you find, if you go there all these years, I have I publish a lot in the United States. In the last weeks, I think 3 or 4 articles I published, like in Town Hall or Washington Examiner, or Real Clear Markets, or recently, even last Sunday, yesterday, I had a big article in the New York Post, and sometimes in the Wall Street Journal. So you can find all my English articles there. But I prefer people read my books, to be honest, because this is I have more room, to explain and to develop all this research. And you read my books, and I think you can confirm, in spite of being a scholar and have it with all these footnotes, I try, and I think I'm able to write it and to explain it in a way that everyone, I would put it this way, everyone who can understand the Wall Street Journal or New York Times can also understand my book. Maybe not everyone, but everyone who can understand them.
Absolutely. Rainer Zitelmann, the author of great books like New Space Capitalism 2075 that came out this year, as well as this book, Hitler's National Socialism. And I may be able to talk him into coming back for In Defense of Capitalism. But Rainer Zitelmann, thank you so much for being our guest today.
Absolutely. We can do it every month if you like. I have so far written 32 books. So
wow.
there's a lot of I have a lot of topics, and it's great. Please come back to me, and I will connect you also, if you like, with this Professor Falter is his name,
Okay.
to talk about his Hitler book.
Sounds good. Thanks, Rainer. We'll talk to you soon.
Okay, great. Good.